Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got 3 creepy stories straight from Reddit that'll definitely give you chills. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And if you got any video ideas or stories you want to hear, drop them in the comments below. Alright, let's get into it. Don't Let Her Fool You by Big Boss Gamer 365. Don't let her fool you. I tilted my head as I read my mother's strange text. There was no context in the previous conversation or build-up to warrant the strange cryptic message. I hadn't texted my mother in a few hours, and even then, it was to remind her to pick up dog food on our way home from the church that night. "Who are we talking about?" I replied, and waited. Nothing. My dog Lucy suddenly lifted her head before letting out a series of loud barks as she ran toward the door. The unexpected loud noise caused me to jump in my seat. My dog stared at the door and barking intensely. The door's window looked obscured by the darkness of the night outside, like an inky veil hiding whatever was making my dog nervous just behind it. I slid off my gaming headphones and began approaching the door. As I stepped down the hallway towards the door, I felt a strange unease as I looked at the doorknob. Unlocked. We always lock our doors once the sun sets, but with my parents gone and myself distracted by my game, the thought of doing so had escaped my mind. As I reached the door, I quickly moved my hand and locked it before flipping on the porch light. The curtain of darkness was pulled back to reveal an empty porch. I scanned what little of the yard I could see through the window, looking for any sign of movement in the darkness, but there was none. I shushed my dog, assuming she was alerting over a bad dream or a reflection she saw in the window. She stopped barking, but remained alert, staring at the door with perked ears. I went around the house, locking the other 2 entrances before sitting back down on the couch. I took my phone and looked down at my mother's message again. Don't let her fool you. I clicked the call button. At this point, I was wondering if she had meant to send the message to someone else. If she hadn't, though, I wanted to know who the message was talking about and how they were trying to fool me. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. Lucy came over and sat down next to me, looking around the room with great unease. "What's gotten into you?" I said as I reached down and patted her head. Without warning, Lucy lurched to her feet and began barking intensely at the back door now. Startled, I tried calming her, but she refused to be pulled away or settled. "There is nothing out there," I said as I ran my hand over the hackles across her back. Her barking refused to stop. I stepped to the door and pulled the string that opened the faux blinds that obscured the window. "See? No one is there." I flipped on the light to the back porch to get a better view. As the light illuminated the porch, that was when I saw it on our door. Something that was unnoticeable without the light from outside. A small round patch of fresh condensation on the outside of the window. I looked closer, not understanding it at first, what I was looking at or the implication it brought. I stepped back as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Something was just standing right outside my door. I jumped as I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Taking it out, I could see a text from my mother. "I need your help. I'll be home soon." I quickly began typing out a reply. "Mom, something weird is going on here. I think someone is walking around the house." After sending the message, I remembered the cameras my parents had installed on the 4 corners of the house. I figured if someone was sneaking around and lurking out for a way to break in, they would show up on the camera. The app buffered for a few seconds before opening the live camera view. I sat surprised as I looked at the screen. 3 of the 4 cameras were offline. Confused, I opened the motion recording section of the app. Think perhaps the cameras caught something before going offline. Nothing. There wasn't a single recording on the app. It was as though all the footage had been deleted and the recording feature turned off. An even more eerie feeling began to creep over me. I gasped as I backed out to the live camera page. The last camera was now offline. I opened the phone app and hovered my thumb over the keypad, about to dial 911. It couldn't be nothing. Just a dog acting strange, a random server issue with the cameras, and weird airflow causing the wet spot on the window, but I wasn't willing to take that kind of chance. If there was something out there, then I need someone here. I had just finished typing in the 3 numbers when a sharp series of knocks rang out from the front door. My heart sank and I flinched as Lucy ran back to the front door, letting out a new fury of aggressive barks. I stepped into the hallway and stared at the door. I could see the faint silhouette of a person standing on the porch, but any details were swallowed up by the darkness of the night. As I stared at the figure, I heard a voice coming through the door. "Sweetie, it's me. Come open the door." The voice sounded familiar, but completely new at the same time. "Who's there?" I called out, taking a few steps down the hallway. "It's your mom, silly. I forgot my keys when I left for the store. I need you to open the door so I can get started on dinner." A cold chill ran down my spine. My mother has a unique voice. Whoever was standing on the other side of the door was trying to replicate it. Certain part of the cadence were spot on, but little things just felt wrong. "My mother is at church," I called out. "I don't know who you are, but I need you to leave now before I call the police." A thick silence filled the air as I waited for a response. "I picked up some cosmic brownies at the store. I know they are your favorite. Please come open the door for me." I don't know what disturbed me more in that moment, the way she ignored my threat and kept up the charade, or the fact that she knew my favorite snack. "I'm calling the police. You need to get..." Thud. The woman stepped up to the door and slammed her fist against it. I could see her better now. The light from inside the house shone through the window and illuminated her rage-filled eyes. Lucy barked more aggressively at the better view of the woman. Lucy was always standoffish to strangers, but the way she was acting was way more aggressive than I had ever seen her before. "You will open the door this instant," she yelled, still trying to imitate my mother's voice. "I am your mother, and you will do as you're told." As I looked at the woman, a new sense of dread passed over me. The woman was not my mother, but she looked like her. She wore the same hairstyle, her head shaped and nose the same. She was even wearing an outfit I could have sworn I had seen on my own mother wear before. But she wasn't my mother. There were small details, different ears, eyes slightly far apart too. The woman looked as though her and my mom could do the doppelganger trend together. At a passing glance, you might mistake the two, but I knew my mother. This wasn't her. I hit the call button on my phone and placed it to my ear as I stepped back further from the door, the quiet ringing sound music to my ears. "I'm calling the police now," I yelled. "Get out of here." Thud, thud. The woman's fist slammed against the window of the door. "Open the damn door," she screamed, no longer hiding behind the imitation. "You will listen to your mother, or I'll give you a reason to be afraid." The 911 operator picked up and asked me what the emergency was, her calm, questioning voice feeling inappropriate given the fear I was feeling in the moment. I quickly recited my address as the woman at the door began pounding on the door harder, screaming vile obscenities between calm moments where she would plead for me to open the door in a now shattered impression of the woman that raised me. "Please hurry," I pleaded. "She's really trying to get in now." Crack. My heart sank as I saw a small crack form around the door, the woman's hand as it slammed against the door. Without leaving another second to pass, I turned and ran. This woman was getting in the house, and I needed to find a place to hide before it was too late. I ran to the kitchen. My head spun as I considered my options, my brain distracted by the woman's screaming and pounding mixed with Lucy's incessant barking. I grabbed a kitchen knife and ran to my parents' bedroom, turning off the lights as I ran to hide my movements. I went into their walk-in closet and tucked myself into the back corner, covered behind layers of my father's coats and his shirts. My whole body jumped as I heard the window shattered, followed by a pained scream from the woman. "Look what you made me do," she screamed before her voice suddenly calmed to a sickening sweet tone. "This cut is really bad, sweetheart. Can you bring me a Band-Aid?" "She's in the house," I whispered into the phone. The 911 operator instructed me to stay silent and in place while help was on the way. I could hear Lucy running around the house, barking wildly. She wasn't a small dog, but she wasn't the type to actually get violent if push came to shove. I could hear the woman walking around the house, calling out for me in my mother's voice. "Sweetheart, this is all a misunderstanding. Come out and see me. Let me hold you." From the sound of it, she was looking around the kitchen and living room. "Lucy is acting really strange," she called out. "Maybe the diet we put her on has her acting weird. Come take a look at her for me." We had put Lucy on a special diet a few weeks before. We hadn't told anyone, but she knew. "You always did like playing hide and seek when you were little," she said as I heard her step into my parents' room, "even when no one else was playing. Just come out and see me." I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe. I muted my phone so the operator's voice wouldn't be heard. I kept silent in the crippling fear for my life. Every second an eternity. Every sound of an approaching footfall met with a further deeper pit in my stomach. "You were always so disobedient," she spoke softly, her voice stifling anger. "You were always my least favorite, but I still love you." I heard the clicking sound of the closet door as she turned the doorknob. "You should appreciate our family the way I do." I heard the door swing open. I could see flickers of the light from the bedroom dance between the drapes that covered me. I knew any moment the horrid imposter would put back the clothes and kill me. I gripped the knife tighter. I had never been a fighter. I knew between my fear and lack of experience I didn't stand a chance. I would fight, but I knew I would fail. Her hauntingly soft voice filled the closet. "We'll have such lovely family time to get..." Her voice was cut off by the sound of police sirens pulling down our road. She waited a moment and then sighed deeply. "So bad," she whispered before I heard her footsteps moving quickly out of the room. I began to hyperventilate as I heard the police call out as they made their way into the house. I couldn't believe the ordeal was over. I walked in shock as the police led me through the house, and that it was covered in a blood trail. Lucy followed us around, refusing to leave my side. I sent up a small prayer, thanking God that the lady didn't do anything to Lucy besides scare her. The police took me outside and questioned me on the events while other police searched the area trying to find the woman. They never did. When my parents arrived home, I clung to them and cried in my mother's arms. Though my labored cries, I asked the only question I could think to ask at that moment. Who was she? How did you know?" My mother looked at me confused. "How did I know what, sweetheart?" "The woman. You sent those text messages." My mother's face went pale. "I haven't had my phone all night. I forgot it when I went to church. It was in the house somewhere." I looked down at my phone while trying to grasp the terrifying facts of the situation. The woman had been in the house at some point without me even knowing it. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my hand, a Facebook notification. My mother tagged me in something. I opened the notification from my phone to take me to a small, simple post only a few seconds old. It was 2 pictures. The first was a family photo we had taken a few years ago when we went on vacation to Disney World. The second photo was a photo of me, standing at the front door, looking out of the window. Above the photos was a small line of text that simply read, "I love my family." I'm a piano player for the rich and famous. My recent client demands some strange things. By Society Menensis. I've been playing piano for the wealthy for almost 15 years now. Ever since graduating from Juilliard with a degree I couldn't afford and debt I couldn't manage, I found that my classical training was best suited for providing ambiance to those who viewed Bach and Chopin as mere background to their conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes. My name is Everett Carlisle. I am or was a pianist for the elite. I played in penthouses overlooking Central Park, in Hamptons State with ocean views that stretched to forever, on yachts anchored off the coast of Monaco, and in ballrooms where a single chandelier costs more than what most people make in 5 years. I'm writing this because I need to document what happened. I need to convince myself that I didn't imagine it all, though God knows I wish I had. I've been having trouble sleeping. Every time I close my eyes, I still see their faces. I hear the sounds. I smell I'm getting ahead of myself. Started 3 weeks ago with an email from a name I didn't recognize, Thaddeus Wexler. The subject line read, "Exclusive engagement, substantial compensation." This wasn't unusual. Most of my clients found me through word of mouth or my website, and the wealthy often led with money as if it's the only language that matters. Usually they're right. The email was brief and formal. "Mr. Carlisle, your services have been recommended by a mutual acquaintance for a private gathering of considerable importance. The engagement requires absolute discretion and will be compensated at $25,000 for a single evening's performance. Should you be interested, please respond to confirm your availability for April 18th. A car will collect you at 7 p.m. sharp. Further details will be provided upon your agreement to our terms. Regards, Thaddeus Wexler, the Ishtar Society." $25,000 for one night? I played for billionaires who balked at my usual rate of $2,000. This was either a joke or, I wasn't sure what else it could be, but curiosity got the better of me, and the balance in my checking account didn't hurt either. I responded the same day. To my surprise, I received a call within an hour from a woman who identified herself only as Miss Harlow. Her voice was crisp, professional, with that particular cadence that comes from years of managing difficult people and situations. "Mr. Carlisle, thank you for your prompt response. Mr. Wexler was confident you would be interested in our offer. Before we proceed, I must emphasize the importance of discretion. The event you will be attending is a private in the truest sense of the word. I understand I've played for many private events. Confidentiality is standard in my contracts. This goes beyond standard confidentiality, Mr. Carlisle. The guests at this gathering value their privacy above all else. You will require to sign additional agreements, including an NDA with substantial penalties. Something about her tone made me pause. There was an edge to it, a warning barely contained beneath the professional veneer. What exactly is this event? I asked. An annual meeting of the Ishtar Society. It's a philanthropic organization with a long history. The evening includes dinner, speeches, and a ceremony. Your role is to provide accompaniment throughout. What kind of music are you looking for? Classical, primarily. We'll provide a specific program closer to the date. Mr. Wexler has requested that you prepare Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, as well as selected pieces by Debussy and Satie. Simple enough request, still something felt off. And the location? A private estate in the Hudson Valley. As mentioned, transportation will be provided. You'll be returned to your residence when the evening concludes. I hesitated, but the thought of $25,000, enough to cover 6 months of my Manhattan rent, pushed me forward. All right, I'm in. Excellent. A courier will deliver paperwork tomorrow. Please sign all documents and return them with the courier. Failure to do so will nullify our agreement. The paperwork arrived as promised. A thick manila envelope containing the most extensive non-disclosure agreement I've ever seen. It went beyond the usual confidentiality clauses to include penalties for even discussing the existence of the event itself. I would forfeit not just my fee, but potentially face a lawsuit for damages up to $5 million if I breached any terms. There were also a list of instructions. 1. Wear formal black tie attire, tuxedo, white shirt, black bow tie. 2. Bring no electronic devices of any kind. 3. Do not speak unless spoken to. 4. Remain at the piano unless instructed otherwise. 5. Play only the music provided in the accompanying program. 6. Do not acknowledge guests unless they acknowledge you first. The last instructions was underlined. What happens at the society remains at the society. The music program was enclosed as well, a carefully curated selection of melancholy and contemplative pieces. Debussy's Clair de Lune, Satie's Gimopidis, several Chopin nocturnes and preludes, and Bach's Goldenberg variations. All beautiful pieces, but collectively they created a somber, almost funeral atmosphere. I should have walked away then. The money was incredible, yes, but everything about it felt wrong. However, like most people facing a financial windfall, I rationalized. Rich people are eccentric. Their parties are often strange, governed by antiquated rules of etiquette. This would just be another night playing for people who saw me as furniture with fingers. How wrong I was. April 18th arrived at precisely 7 p.m. A black Suburban with tinted windows pulled up outside my apartment building in Morningside Heights. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut, who introduced himself only as Reed, held the door open without a word. The vehicle's interior was immaculate, with soft leather seats and a glass partition separated me from the driver. On the seat beside me was a small box with a card that read, "Please put this on before we reach our destination." Inside was a black blindfold made of heavy silk. This was crossing the line. "Excuse me," I called to the driver. "I wasn't informed about a blindfold." The partition lowered slightly. "Mr. Wexler's instructions, sir. Security protocols. I can return you to your residence if you prefer, but the engagement would be canceled." $25,000? I put on the blindfold. We drove for what felt like 2 hours, though I couldn't be certain. The roads eventually became less smooth. We were no longer on a highway, but winding through what I assumed were rural roads. Finally, the vehicle slowed and came to a stop. I heard gravel crunching beneath tires. Then silence as the engine was turned off. "We've arrived, Mr. Carlisle. You may remove the blindfold now." I blinked as my eyes adjusted to the fading daylight. Before me stood what could only be described as a mansion, though that would seem insufficient. It was a sprawling stone structure that looked like it belonged in the English countryside rather than upstate New York. Gothic in design, with towering spires and large windows that reflected with the sunset in hues of red and orange. The grounds were immaculate, perfectly manicured gardens, stone fountains, and pathways lined with unlit torches. Reed escorted me to a side entrance, where we were met by a slender woman in a black dress. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her pale skin. "Mr. Carlisle, I'm Miss Harlow." We spoke on the phone. Her handshake was brief and cold. "The guests will be arriving shortly. I'll show you to the ballroom where you'll be performing." We walked through service corridors, avoiding what I assumed would be the main halls of the house. The decor was old money, oil paintings in glint frames, antique furniture, Persian rugs on hardwood floors. Everything spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. The ballroom was vast, with a ceiling that rose at least 30 feet, adorned with elaborate plasterwork and a chandelier that must have held 100 light bulbs. At one end was a raised platform where a gleaming black Steinway grand piano waited. The room was otherwise empty, though dozens of round tables with black tablecloths had been arranged across the polished floor, each set with fine china, crystal, and silver. "You'll play from here," Miss Harlow said, leading me to the piano. "The program is on the stand. Please familiarize yourself with the sequence. Timing is important this evening." I looked at the program again. It was the same section I'd been practicing, but now each piece had specific timings noted beside it. The Chopin Nocturne was marked for 9:45 p.m., with "critical" written in red beside it. "What happens at 9:45? I asked. Miss Harlow's expression didn't change. "The ceremony begins. Mr. Wexler will signal you." She checked her watch. "It's 7:30 now. Guests will begin arriving at 8. There's water on the side table. Please help yourself. But I must remind you not to leave the piano area under any circumstances once the first guest arrives." "What if I need to use the restroom?" "Use it now. Once you're at the piano, you remain there until the evening concludes." "How long will that be?" "Until it's over." Her tone made it clear that was all the information I would receive. "One final thing, Mr. Carlisle. No matter what you see or hear tonight, you are to continue playing. Do not stop until Mr. Wexler indicates the evening has concluded. Is that clear?" A chill ran through me. What exactly am I going to see or hear? Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw something like pity. The Ishtar Society has traditions that may seem unusual to outsiders. Your job is to play, not to understand. Remember that, and you'll leave with your fee and without any complications. With that cryptic warning, she left me alone in the massive room. I sat at the piano, testing the keys. The instrument was perfectly tuned, responsive in a way that only comes from regularly maintained by master technicians. Under different circumstances, I would have been thrilled to play such a fine piano. Over the next half hour, staff began to enter, servers in formal attire, security personnel positioned discreetly around the perimeter, and technicians adjusting lighting. No one spoke to me or even looked in my direction. At precisely 8 p.m., the main doors opened and the first guests began to arrive. They entered in pairs and small groups, all impeccably dressed in formal evening wear. The men in tailored tuxedos, the women in gowns that likely cost more than most cars, but what struck me immediately was how they moved, with a practiced grace that seemed almost choreographed, and with expressions that betrayed neither joy nor anticipation, but something closer to solemn reverence. I began to play as instructed, starting with Bach's Goldenberg variations. The acoustics in the room were perfect, the notes resonating clearly throughout the space. As I played, I observed the guests. They were uniformly affluent, but diverse in age and ethnicity. Some I recognized: a tech billionaire known for his controversial data mining practices, a former cabinet secretary who left politics for a private equity, a Harris whose pharmaceutical fortune, a film director whose work had grown increasingly disturbing over the years. They mingled with practiced smiles that never reached their eyes. Servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, but I noticed that many guests barely touched either. There was an air of anticipation waiting. At 8:30, a hush fell over the room as a tall, silver-haired man entered. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. This, I assumed, was Thaddeus Wexler. He moved through the crowd, accepting deferential nods and brief handshakes. He didn't smile either. Dinner was served at precisely 8:45, just as I transitioned to Debussy. The conversation during the meal was subdued, lacking the usual animated chatter of high society gatherings. These people weren't here to network or be seen. They were here for something else. At 9:30, I began Satie's first Gymnopédie. The doors opened again. A new group entered, but these were not guests. They were different. About 20 people filed in, escorted by security personnel. They were dressed in simple white clothing, loose pants and tunics that looked almost medical. They moved uncertainly, some stumbling slightly. Their expressions ranged from confusion to mild fear. Most notably, they looked ordinary, not wealthy, not polished, regular people who seemed completely out of place in the setting. The guests watched their entrance with an intensity that made my fingers falter on the keys. I quickly recovered, forcing myself to focus on the music rather than the bizarre scene unfolding before me. The newcomers were led to the center of the room, where they stood in a loose cluster, looking around with increasing unease. Some attempted to speak to their escorts, but were met with stony silence. At 9:43, Thaddeus Wexler rose from his seat at the central table. The room felt completely silent except for the playing. He raised a crystal glass filled with dark red liquid. "Friends," his voice was deep, resonant. "We gather once more in service to the great balance. For prosperity, there must be sacrifice. For abundance, there must be scarcity. For us to rise, others must fall. It has always been so, it will always be so." The guests raised their glasses in unison. "To the balance," they intoned. Wexler turned to face the group in white. "You have been chosen to serve a purpose greater than yourselves. Your sacrifice sustains our world. For this, we are grateful." I was now playing Chopin's Nocturne. The piece marked critical on my program. My hands moved automatically while my mind raced to understand what was happening. Sacrifice? What did that mean? One of the people in white, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, stepped forward. "You said this was about a job opportunity. You said..." A security guard moved swiftly, pressing something in the man's neck that made him crumple to his knees, gasping. Wexler continued as if there had been no interruption. "Tonight, we renew our covenant. Tonight, we ensure another year of prosperity." As the nocturne reached its middle section, the mood in the room shifted palpably. The guests rose from their tables and formed a circle around the confused group in white. Each guest produced a small obsidian knife from inside their formal wear. My blood ran cold, but I kept playing. Miss Harlowe's words echoed in my mind. "No matter what you see or hear tonight, you are to continue playing." "Begin," Wexler commanded. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day. The guests moved forward in unison, each selecting one of the people in white. There was a moment of confused struggle before the guards restrained the victims. Then, with practiced precision, each guest made a small cut on their chosen victim's forearm, collecting drops of blood in their crystal glasses. This wasn't a massacre I had initially feared. It was something more ritualized, more controlled, but no less disturbing. The people in white were being used in some sort of blood ritual. Their fear and confusion provided a stark contrast to the methodical actions of the wealthy guests. After collecting the blood, the guests returned to the circle, raising the glasses once more. "With this offering, we bind our fortunes," Wexler noted. "With their essence, we ensured our ascension." The guests drank from their glasses, all of them. They drank the blood of the strangers as casually as one might sip champagne. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I forced myself to continue playing. The nocturne transitioned to its final section. My fingers trembled slightly on this key. The people in white were led away, looking dazed and frightened. I noticed something else. Small bandages on their arms, suggesting this wasn't the first collection they had endured. As the last notes from the nocturne faded, Wexler turned to face me directly for the first time. His eyes were dark, calculating. He gave a small nod, and I moved on to the next piece as instructed. The remainder of the evening proceeded with a surreal normalcy. The guests resumed their seats, dessert was served, and conversations gradually returned, though it remained subdued. No one mentions what had just occurred. No one seemed disturbed by it. It was as if they had simply performed a routine business transaction rather than participated in a blood ritual. I played mechanically, my mind racing. Who were those people? I played mechanically, my mind racing. Who were those people in white? Where had they come from? What happened to them after they were led away? The questions pounded in my head in rhythm with the music. At 11:30, Wexler rose again. The covenant is renewed. Our path is secured for another year. May prosperity continue to flow to those who understand its true cost. The guests applauded politely, then began to depart in the same ordinary fashion they arrived. Within 30 minutes, only Wexler, Miss Harlow, and a few staff remained in the ballroom. Wexler approached the piano as I finished the final piece on the program. Excellent performance, Mr. Carlisle. Your reputation is well deserved. His voice was smooth, cultured. Thank you, I managed, struggling to keep my expression neutral. May I ask what I just witnessed? A slight smile curved his lips. You witnessed nothing, Mr. Carlisle. That was our arrangement. You played beautifully, and now you will return home, $25,000 richer, with nothing but the memory of providing music for an exclusive gathering. Those people are participating in a medical trial, he interrupted smoothly. Quiet voluntarily, I assure you. They're compensated generously for their contributions, much as you are for yours. I didn't believe him, couldn't believe him, but I also understood the implicit threat in his words. I had signed their document, I'd agreed to their terms. Of course, I said. I was merely curious about the unusual ceremony. Curiosity is natural, Wexler replied. Acting on it would be unwise. I trust you understand the difference. Miss Harlow appeared on his side, holding an envelope. Your payment, Mr. Carlisle, as agreed. The car is waiting to take you back to the city. I took the envelope, feeling its substantial weight. Thank you for the opportunity. Perhaps we'll call on you again, Wexler said, though his tone made it clear this was unlikely. Remember our terms, Mr. Carlisle. What happens at the society remains at the society, I finished. Indeed. Good night. Reed was waiting by the black Suburban. Once again, I was asked to don the blindfold for the return journey. As we drove through the night, I clutched the envelope containing my fee and tried to process what I had witnessed. It was until I was back in my apartment, counting the stacks of $100 bills, that the full impact hit me. I ran to the bathroom and vomited, until there was nothing left. $25,000. The price of my silence. The cost of my complicity. I've spent the past 3 weeks trying to convince myself that there was a reasonable explanation for what I saw. That Wexler was telling the truth about medical trials, that the whole thing was just some elaborate performance art for the jaded ultra-wealthy. But I know better. Those people in white weren't volunteers. Their confusion and fear were genuine. And the way the guests consumed their blood with such reverence, such practiced ease, this wasn't their first ceremony. I've tried researching the Ishtar Society, but found nothing. Not a mention, not a whisper. As if it doesn't exist. I've considered going to the police, but with what would I tell them? That I witnessed rich people drinking a few drops of blood in a ritual? Without evidence, without even being able to say there was a mansion was located, who would believe me? And then there's the NDA, $5 million in penalties. They would ruin me. And based on what I saw, financial ruin might be the least of my concerns if I crossed them. So, I remained silent since. Until now, writing this down is a risk, but I need to document what happened before I convince myself it was all a dream. Last night, I received another email. Mr. Carlisle, your services are required for our winter solstice gathering on December 21st. The compensation will be doubled for your return engagement. A car will collect you at 7 p.m. The society was pleased with your performance and discretion. Regards, Thaddeus Wexler, the Ishtar Society. $50,000 for one night of playing piano while the elite perform their blood rituals. I should delete the email. I should move apartments, change my name, disappear. But $50,000. And a part of me, a dark, curious part I never knew existed, wants to go back. To understand what I witnessed. To know what happens to those people in white after they're led away. To learn what the great balance truly means. I have until December to decide. Until then, I'll keep playing at regular society parties, providing background music for the merely wealthy rather than the obscenely powerful. I'll smile and nod and pretend I'm just a pianist, nothing more. But every time I close my eyes, I see Wexler raising his glass. I hear his words about sacrifice and balance, and I wonder, how many others have been in my position? How many witnessed this ceremony and chose money over morality? How many returned for a second performance? And most troubling of all, if I do go back, will I ever be allowed to leave again? The winter solstice is approaching. I have a decision to make. The Ishtar Society is waiting for my answer. My wife has been peeking at me from around corners and behind furniture. It's gone from weird to terrifying. By Mila Girl 13. My wife Lynn and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea, and that's fine. But that's what's so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. But some people are able to hide their mental health problems. But in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd see some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door. When I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me, I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the shit out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird, and just totally out of character for her, I said. But I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of OJ in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning like a Cheshire cat. I screamed, I'll admit it, not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason, at that moment, I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her or even yell after her. I just stood there frozen in shock, wondering what the fuck had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing, to be sure it really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me at the moment I go to bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again, from over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the fuck out sometimes, you know that?" I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away, I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love for all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She had the lid popped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth she was doing this. She didn't answer, but she just had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire out of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think that she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. She was still peeking at me when I wasn't looking, and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then, a few days ago, things got much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower and I was washing the soap from my hair. I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a fucking heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain. Her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving her body outside. Her long dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did the smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheek in 2 blank streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was fucking terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry fingers through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in the bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house, and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. "What the fuck, Lynn?" I snapped. "This shit is getting really fucking annoying." But I waited for her to apologize or call me a jerk, but instead I heard a faint moan. So quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. "Lynn?" I called out, not being able to hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. "I swear to God, just fucking stop it," I yelled, pounding my fists on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would have expected from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before. But there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a fucking lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom. So, I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway, the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand covering over the door, mentally prepare myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers, and that was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I wasn't able to tell where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion, and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared even for that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow, I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold. Maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house, about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I was going and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but I didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, I hadn't encouraged her for years to lighten up. Instead of being so serious all the time, I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there the entire time made my skin crawl. She never left the fucking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that, when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I annoyed the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now." She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs. As if Lynn could hear them from her place outside, her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there was the 2 streaks of jewels dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I were outside to the spot in the front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I had dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at this point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried for most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw dozens of texts she'd sent, all from seemingly a concerned wife. Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home. And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled, like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation, but if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you would find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place, but is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know, she's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of what batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife, but how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset, very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca had, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded, casually as if the fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though the predator lurked behind me. No, she just asked if you were awake, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. She just let you sleep. She said as she washed the dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else, I asked. No, she looked awful, though. She hasn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn, to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believe she was, I had to try to get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being crazy? As bizarre as she'd been, she hasn't committed any crime. Not yet, anyways. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting, but this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong, dangerous even. Like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband, I was well within my rights to have her committed. But what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed. So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Moraine, and I were never on the best terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin lip smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt like the most unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away, so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. "Yes," she answered, already sounding irritated. "Maureen, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. "I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment." "What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin?" she said coolly. "Is it about Lynn? She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something." I was quickly interrupted. "It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is it that you want from me?" she asked. I could almost see her standing in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. "I wanted to know if you've ever noticed any odd behaviors, or possibly any mental health issues," I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. "I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, don't find humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend, as I've said, so if you don't mind," she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. "Maureen, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother you would be as well," I said, my frustration evident in my voice. "If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved." "I don't know what you expect of me," she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. "Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn," I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steady persona together, but failing. "Marianne, what's wrong?" I started. "Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye." I tried to call out to her, but she hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to reply to the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. "Seek professional help." She said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no. I was sure her voice had changed even so slightly when she said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to something else. Someone that didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet. But I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. "Maybe for YouTube," Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pocket like he was going on a fucking stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. "What do you guys use to clean the floors around here? Shit?" Chris mumbled. "Shut up," I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark, despite being 10 a.m. in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house had been abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place she might hide, occasionally calling out her name. "Why the fuck are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked eventually. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a moron. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung from the wall on the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all of the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bedroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that, so we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since that night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something," Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the car to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals and wondered how'd she gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction, but fuck me, your wife's in here collecting eyeballs? Chris said, gagging. "Ben, I think we should go," he called from the hall. "I'm getting nauseous." "All right." I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue, and I couldn't help but gag. "Who the fuck lines up eyeball in their closet like that?" Chris mumbled. "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said. "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a fucking exorcist," he said. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any—" His words died in his throat, and his eyeballs grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Christ," I whispered as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curling on her side, watching us with excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew we'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving to say the least. Wide eyes, and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted she was, still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn," I said softly, but she didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements, as if she were nodding. "Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. "I love you, Lynn," I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could hear see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. "Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She moved, bobbing her head again, the bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up in my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in that state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sound got louder and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from between her fingers. "Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down into the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris, the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run! Go!" I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move, because a second later I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said. You, playing hide and seek?" I reached back and pushed him towards the step. "Move your ass, Chris," I said, as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp movements and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her, and then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear, so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain on my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to the car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rearview mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us, but I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search, but of course Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so, because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I found you." And a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistake, my wife's eyes. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched.